This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gold.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. With me, as always, Ken Roy Ball. Ken, how are you?
I like the way you pronounced my name because it's proper, you know.
I'm still upset at myself for not pronouncing it correctly for so long.
Well, at least you didn't call me Rubble. Used to have somebody call me Rubble. Like Barney Rubble from the Flintstones?
Barney Rubble. Rubskull.
Yeah. You know, but it's okay. I get the name somehow throws people off. I don't know.
It's a big name. It's not like an unknown name. That name is like there's a Roy Ball building in downtown Los Angeles.
It is Los Angeles royalty.
It's your building, right?
I own it. I collect rent.
It is Ken's.
I own it. Yeah.
Well, sir. Today we have on Charles Gardner. He was 25 years in the correction system in Upstate New York, and he retired a judge. And the really cool thing is he wrote a book about Dannemora, that infamous prison break that happened in 2015.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They did a Showtime series on it, and I hear his book is really good. It's getting great reviews, and it's called Dannemora, 2 Escaped Killers, 3 Weeks of Terror, and the Largest Manhunt Ever in Upstate New York. So I want to try to get some prison stories out of him, some of that prison love, and then that might not be the right term.
Some prison love. You know, there's that old story. Morning sex is great unless you're in prison.
Right.
Yeah.
Stories. Prison stories.
You could not pay me to be a prison guard, a corrections officer. That's just that's not my thing, man.
Yeah, I want to ask him about that because people growing up, they say they want to be firefighters, they want to be cops. No one really says they want to be a prison guard, but I think some people get into it to use it as a stepping stone to being a cop, and they end up staying because they like it. I think that's that's my take on it anyways.
That's interesting. I think that I think there should be 2 prison guards for every inmate.
That's a lot of guards.
That's the only way you can keep, I don't understand how they keep even civility in there. It's just crazy. But it's each prison is a little North Korea. It's its own.
Yeah, it's definitely acquired taste, but I do know guys that love it. I know guys go into the sheriffs in LA County and then they end up never leaving the prison. They never hit the road. Oh,
I did backgrounds on 2 prison guards from California corrections officers, and both got hired by LAPD. And I don't know. I'm sure I remember. I asked them why they wanted to leave. I can't remember, but it's a totally different gig than street police work. So depends. But yeah, a lot of people I know 2 people who spent 30 years there and retired, and they're great, but that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah, really, it's very interesting. We had a former guest on. One of the first guests we had on started as prison guard and then went into probation and became like a probation agent.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I forget which episode number that was, but anywho, I want to ask him about that. I want prison stories. I want to hear about his take on Dannemora, and I want to hear about being a judge. How do you swing 25 years in corrections into being a judge? That's pretty awesome.
Judge, and isn't he a professor as well? Is he a professor? I can't remember.
I think you're right.
We'll ask him because he'll probably know everything about him.
He'll know what he did, I think. Hopefully.
You know what's trippy? This name of this prison, Dannemora, just sounds like it should be a DiCaprio movie.
Yeah,
Dannemora.
Very
scary. I'm scared.
Very, very spooky. Okay, here we go. I'm going to dial him in.
Dial him in.
Hello.
Charles Gardner, welcome to Things Police See. Thank you for coming on. You're on with Steve and Ken.
Hello.
Hi, guys. How are you?
We're doing good. Doing fantastic, sir. We're excited to have you. You're, I think I think you're only the second corrections guy that we've had on before. We had on corrections guy on back at the very start of the podcast, but you're the second, and I see here you ended up a judge, which is pretty great.
Thank you. Yeah, I finished up my career 25 years, and then I ran for a position of a municipal judge here in our little tiny town, and was elected and did that for a term. And then my book was coming out, and we knew that was going to be a bit of a conflict, so I did not run for the second term.
Oh, I got you. So one of the elected positions. That's cool. I used to work with a guy from New York that he said that he worked in a town where they had the courtroom was like attached to the police department. So you literally the next morning you could walk the prisoner out right into court.
Yeah, that would have been nice. Our county, they wake you up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 2 in the afternoon. Whenever the individual is ready to be arraigned is when you get that phone call.
Gotcha. Hey, Charles, I don't want you to think I'm rude, but we do I can see you on the Skype phone. We just do audio. So that's why my video is not on right now and you're not seeing me. I don't want you to think I was.
All right.
I'm gonna turn my video on then because Charles has his on.
Sure.
With my new camera.
Good man, Ken. Don't leave me hanging.
Yeah, we just do it to maximize bandwidth. That's all, just for the audio. So, Charles,
I'm all new to this, so to me it's yeah.
I understand. So you did 25 years in corrections, and Ken and I were chatting before we dialed you in, and how'd you get into corrections? I'm curious because there's, we were saying how it's a lot of times people you want to be a firefighter, you want to be a cop, but not a lot of people say like I want to be a prison guard. You know what I mean? So what was your path into that?
Well, I kind of had hit all three of those. I was a village police officer back in the 80s, and loved it. Loved every second of it. And my family owned a small ma-pa business up here in northern New York, and my father was involved in a accident. Long story short, I went back to the family business and walked away from that career. Then the family business, I walked away from it. I was just lost. I loved working as a police officer. I absolutely loved the industry. An opportunity came along that I was able to sell the business, which was my father's business after he had passed. And I went with that opportunity, and I went into with the Department of Corrections, getting back into the law enforcement field.
Got it. All right. And this was in upstate New York, right?
That is correct. That's where I was from. Unfortunately, with New York State Department of Corrections, the way it works is once you become a member of the organization and you go through the training academy, you go to wherever the voids are. And back in the late 80s, when I got into the New York State Department of Corrections, the need for the manpower, the void was down in Westchester County, down probably a dozen miles from New York City. Basically an 8-hour drive from home. I'm a northern New York mutt. I live up into the Adirondack, the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. So for me, it was quite a task just getting down there 8 hours away. And that's where you were working every week for quite a while.
Wow. Yeah. Before we get into your analysis of the Dannemora prison break in your book, I'd love to hear any stories you might have from the prisons. Do you have a call, like a first experience you had, a first like intense or adrenaline dropping experience in the prisons?
Well, you always hope to go through your entire career without ever having that oh hell moment.
Right.
I went through a few of them, needless to say. My career, I started as a correctional officer. I promoted up to a sergeant. Years later, I promoted to a lieutenant, and then I was appointed by the Albany Training Academy as a regional training lieutenant who oversaw training of approximately 6,000 members in the northern 13 facilities of the state. But as an officer, I had experienced a massive disturbance in one of our yards, whereas we had approximately 300 plus inmates and only 8 staff members. Ooh. And the reason why we had so many staff members as 8 with over 300 inmates was because the facility knew that there was going to be potential for a problem, and they'd put extra staff in the area. And so when you kind of put that all together, with extra staff being 8 people, with over 300 inmates, and to watch it unfold, and it was quite an experience, without a doubt. Needless to say, didn't get home for a couple of days afterwards. Facility was on lockdown. We had quite a mess to clear up and clean up. Hoping that would be the only time I would experience such a thing. But lo and behold, as a lieutenant, as a watch commander at Great Meadow was a maximum security facility that I worked later on in my career as a lieutenant. And again, major disturbance in the yard, where they had dropped gas, and we had a number of inmates in the yard. And again, it was an entire evening before we got the yard cleared out and the facility realistically back into a normal operation. So can go through your whole career and never have an incident. And I had kind of 2 little scrubs that makes you appreciate those quieter days, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Steve and I were talking about this before you came on, and we were discussing how, with a small, kind of seems like a small staff of corrections officers, keep this large group of prisoners, convicted felons, in line. How do you even do that?
Well, a little respect goes a long ways in the industry. When you look at any correctional facility, and we can utilize Dannemora as a perfect example. I had only worked a couple of weeks in Clinton Correctional, or Dannemora, which is where our story evolves. And that was at the very beginning of my career. And you have basically 3,000 inmates at that facility. And you have approximately 1,000 uniformed correctional officers. And that's including your supervising staff, which is your sergeants, your lieutenants, your captains, as well as your DEP, that are all in uniform. You take that 1,000 uniformed staff and you divide them amongst 3 shifts, and then you take out for training and take out for sick time and take out for days off and take out for other incidentals. And you come down to just a few hundred monitoring and watching 3,000 convicted felons. It's a hell of a balancing act. Corrections is always looking for better ratios than what we have, than what the state allows us. You utilize any and all tools that you have. You utilize your gates. You utilize the common sense approach of your staff. And you just hope for a lot of good days in a row. But at any given moment, the numbers are there. It isn't nuclear science here. At any day, it can go south on you. But I find that respect goes a long ways. Common sense prevails, but every once in a while, it just, it hits the fan, pure and simple.
Sure. So I'm guessing, like, in this situation, everybody's not out at the same time. Different pods are locked down. But even when there is a couple hundred prisoners and only 1 or 2 guards, they know it's futile. Like, they know what's going to happen if we have an uprising. They're going to, even if we take these 2 guards out, they're going to lock us down. The guys in the turtle suits are going to come in. They're going to kick our ass. And ultimately, it will be all for naught, right? That's kind of the psychology they're probably going through.
Without a doubt, yeah. And in corrections, as a staff member, and as a member of the CERT team, the Corrections Emergency Response Team, I was a supervisor with that for a few years during my career. Ultimately, the inmates do understand that there's always going to be a day of reckoning. understand we have to follow the letter of law, and we have to, conduct ourselves accordingly, because there's always retribution for stupidity. But we're not going to lose one way or the other. We're not going to lose the battle. We might lose a couple of these little wars, but when it's all said and done, we're not going to lose the battle, pure and simple. And that's the mentality that you had to go to work with. At the end of the day, we're going to win one way or the other.
I think you got the title for your next book, Day of Reckoning. That'd be great. Stories of prison guards kicking ass.
Or we're not going to lose.
Goodness.
I like that one.
Well, there's probably a few of them out there. And just also, now, I'm old school, and I'm assuming you must be as well, because I call them prison guards as well. But the young lads that are out there now, they're offended by prison guards. Guards are the school crossing people, or the guys that are working security at Walmart type of a thing. They refer the correction officer title. But please understand, Steve and Ken, I'm not offended. I'm an old school prison guard.
No, yeah.
For me, it's a kind of a badge of honors.
It's classic, man.
Yeah,
we'd have a little bit of feedback from a few of those younger lads that don't appreciate it, but you're fine with me, just so we understand each other.
It's like the Green Mile. It takes you back, to the old school ways.
Goodness, yes. And like I said, when I started my career, my very first 2 weeks on the job training was at Clinton Correctional. Boy, and those old time prison guards. I mean, you didn't walk into those blocks. You didn't just sit yourself down in somebody's chair. You looked around and you got permission before you sat in a chair, because chances are that chair belonged to the one or two man, the guy that ran the block, or the guy that was second in charge of that block. So the days of just kind of wandering on in there and plopping yourself in a chair, that didn't happen. There was a lot of respect for the old school, the old prison guards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those guys are. I mean, in a lot of ways, when you're a correctional officer, forgive me. When you're
don't do it. It doesn't even feel right.
To me, it was, prison guard is to cop. You know what I mean? Police officer, cop, prison guard, correctional officer. Sure. But no, I totally get it, and they should get lots of respect for what they do, and especially if they work for a municipality or the state. But to me, it's like, to do that job, you got to be tough as nails. And also, you're locked down just like the prisoners. I mean, you're going to work, but you're not on your cell phone. You're not, you don't have you're locked inside. You don't have the freedom that everybody else does when they're working.
Absolutely, you're doing time. And also understand, when you look at your police officers, the police officers are out. They're in the public. Not necessarily everyone that they're dealing with is a criminal. Not necessarily everyone that they're dealing with is a convicted felon. Not necessarily everyone that they're dealing with has an agenda of harm. But when you're a prison guard, correction officer, when you're a prison guard, every single person you're dealing with all day long is a convicted felon.
Yeah.
Every single one of them has an agenda of manipulation, or see what's in it for them. There's a scam of some way, shape, or form that's brewing every second. They're not society's nice people. These are people that are incarcerated for a reason. So when law enforcement on the street deals with them, they're dealing with them for a few hours, whether it be during interviews or during processing. But we get to deal with them for the lifetime, for breakfast, lunch, dinner, recreation, good, bad, healthy, sick, whatever. And they're a strange group of folks. They really are.
Yeah, and they really get to know you too, because you see them every day. So when they get out, if they get out, they're going to know you. They're going to pick you off.
Yeah, they try to get to know you, and that was part of being a prison guard. Was you don't give them that personal information. You don't befriend them. I have nothing in common with them other than I'm walking up and down the same hallways. But other than that, I've got no rap for them. I'm going to treat them with respect. I'm going to give them whatever they got coming, whatever the state says that they're due, whether it be toiletries or warmth or safety or meals. I don't have a problem with that. That's what the state says that they're due, and that's what we're going to make sure that they're getting. But I'm not going to chat about baseball scores or what's going on the weekend, or I don't have any interest in that. And unfortunately, the folks that do find themselves with a lot of problems.
Yeah, that would be really hard for me, man. I'm a talker. I'd be in there. It would be, 2 hours in, I'd be, telling them my life story.
Oh yeah, well, it's hard to unring the bell. You know what I'm saying? And that's where a lot of them fail. And that's a huge part of our training is if you're looking for a friend, the cat that you're monitoring is not your friend.
Yeah.
You want to befriend your staff, and it's some people get it, and some people have no problem with it. Throughout my entire career, I was fortunate enough that I had jobs that I was someplace different literally every week. I was what was known as a vacation relief as an officer. I loved it so much that when I became a sergeant, I went and became vacation relief. And then as a lieutenant, when I promoted again, I did the same thing. I had relief jobs. And so basically I was someplace different all the time. So for anyone to really get to know me was very hard. I was never in one place long enough for you to pattern me. And I liked it that way. And I picked up on that young, as a young officer in my career. And I liked that because I saw other officers falling into that rut. I saw other staff members falling into that rut where they were too chitty chatty. I didn't need that. I wasn't looking for a social experience while working inside a prison.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Ken, I hear you sometimes talking here, but your volume sounds kind of low, just FYI.
Let me see.
Charles, I have a question for you. When I was in police academy, they showed, there's a big max security prison in Massachusetts called Walpole. I think it's called something else now, but it was Cedar something, but it's got a much prettier name, but they used to just call it Walpole. And they showed us a prison riot video, and it was like from, I think, the 70s or 80s. And during the video, they're trying to lock the place down, and then all of a sudden a pumped shotgun slides into the camera view. And it's like, and they were like, yeah, back whenever this video was shot, there were firearms in the prison. Like the guards were armed. And I never thought to ask it, but when did they decide that was not a good idea anymore? And were you guys armed in there, or was it only like perimeter guys?
Yeah, the only people with any kind of firearm post would be the wall towers that surround the prisons and the perimeter patrols.
Because that's a bad idea, right? To have a gun inside.
It sure is. Understand, the officers now in New York are starting to carry chemical agents, and in the maxes, of course, they've always had their batons. But like anything else, 1 against 60, 1 against 100. I mean, the ratios are frightening. I don't care how tough you are. Your baton, your chemical agent, your restraint devices, your keys can be removed from you quite quickly. Like I said, you can be the toughest guy in the room, but if you're outnumbered 20-1, you're not that tough.
Yeah, and one prisoner with a handgun is, it can do a lot of damage.
It's a game changer, without a doubt. Yeah, and unfortunately, guns are smuggled into correctional facilities, as rare as it is. Cell phones are smuggled into correctional facilities, and very problematic because the communications can't be monitored, and all sorts of deals and transactions are taking place, and staff doesn't see it coming. The contraband that gets into facilities is frightening enough. Staff brings in metal forks or metal spoons because they want to eat lunch or dinner with the utensil that they're normally used to. But again, you're introducing an object that can be made into a weapon, fashioned into a weapon quite quickly.
Sure.
I was never one for that. I brought in plastic silverware, plastic knives, plastic forks to eat my lunch or my dinner with, and that always sufficed me for my entire career. But it would always amaze me that people would bring in some of the craziest stuff in the world thinking that, well, this area is ours and it's secure, and inmates know not to go in there, and you're just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's when the trouble starts.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to understand that mentality, but
Ken,
that was the fight you have.
Remember the story we had a week or two ago about the female? We had Charles. We had a female prison guard who was having sex with the inmates.
Oh yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And for a time, the gangs were infiltrating the systems, and they were bringing in either females or males for the introduction of contraband or for the introduction of sexual favors. And it's a never-ending cycle. They just had a staff member up here at one of the local prisons who was arrested by investigators for bringing in synthetic marijuana. I don't get it. I don't understand the mentality. I don't understand, why would you give up a career and a pension?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm now collecting my pension, and I look at it every month. I'm so thankful that I finished my career and I was healthy when I went away. I got to take care of my family, wonderful insurance, great coworkers, and now I have a beautiful pension to do my retirement with. And I can't, for the love of God, wrap my head around the fact that these people are sleeping with inmates, introducing contraband to the inmate population, or, just being stupid in a non-stupid zone. I don't get it, but I have zero sympathy for them. Absolutely zero sympathy.
Human nature never ceases to take over. It's like, it's like,
and that's what I call them humans.
Yep.
Because I can say it in the local grocery store. I can just kind of go, humans. And when I see the stupid behavior, and I'm not insulting anyone, but it's, you just got to kind of shake your head, kind of wonder,
it's
where
like,
do they come up with these ideas,
Yeah. It's like someone wants to offer you pull someone over for speeding, and they have a 50 or 100 sticking out of their, it's obvious. And it's like, hey man, unless that's $2 to $3 million, I'm not taking it, because I'm going to lose my pension. You got to replace that for me,
Exactly. And you can't buy me for that. I'm sorry. You're not going to buy me for a couple of million. You can't do it. I'm sorry. I'm not for sale.
Maybe 5 million, Charles. I would do 5, I think.
Oh, no. Every morning as a guy, when you wake up and you still got to shave, you got to look yourself in the eye, and you got to look yourself in the face. And
of course, yeah.
I don't have any problem sleeping at night, and I don't have any problem getting up in the morning and looking myself in the mirror. That's how I've lived my entire life.
Well, I don't blame you for that, Charles. I'm looking at you right now, and you've got a mustache that will rival Ken's. Good looking stash,
handsome bloke.
Yes, absolutely. Charles and Ken, by the way, you're sounding better.
Thank you.
Charles, that's a mixture between the two of you. Charles, can you tell us, can we get into this Dannemora, this 2015 prison break? How does this happen in modern times? This seems unbelievable when you read about how this went down. I mean, it sounds like something that would happen in Mexico. Like, what the hell happened?
When the story unfolded, I was in my first year as a local municipal judge. I had just finished a 25-year career in corrections. And it was surreal. When you watched it unravel, and you were watching the national media report it, and of course I was listening to the news reports at night like everyone else was in the foothills of the Adirondacks, and of course what prompted me writing the book was the fact that I was like, what in the hell are they talking about? Because unfortunately the media would spin their own stories, and they had so much of it wrong. And that's what basically prompted the writing of the book. But when you sat there and as the story unfolded, and you're listening to the fact that a civilian employee had brought in this contraband, and had brought in a ton of contraband, and had been doing it for a number of months, it was hard to wrap your head around it. And we've just talked about those points. How is it that you can befriend these guys, work in a maximum security prison and think that this is going to end well? I mean, it was hard to wrap your head around just how stupid do you have to be playing these games and thinking that this is going to turn out well.
Yeah. So what was the weak link? What was being brought in?
Well, the weak link is Joyce Mitchell. She's the seamstress. 50-year-old Joyce Mitchell started her career at Clinton Correctional in March of 2008. She was one of those people that she was politically correct. She didn't have a lot of common sense, type of a thing, and she didn't bring a lot of common sense to the job, unfortunately. But she knew the right people to get in the position that she was in, and once she was there, they couldn't get rid of her. And she was problematic pretty much right from the start. She was bringing in stuff that, in the early days, she was bringing in stuff that you would look at and kind of go, well, that's not really, a crisis. At least an outsider would look at that and think that. She was bringing in cookies and brownies and packaged candy, and occasionally bringing in leftovers from a new recipe for the inmates to try. Now, you would look at that maybe and say, well, that's not really problematic, but it's the beginning of the end. Bringing in and introducing any kind of contraband or any kind of things from the street to the inmate population is no, you don't do it. Once she started that behavior early in her career, it's just a slippery slope.
So she's just being nice, but really what she's doing is forming bonds with these people.
Absolutely. And again, we touched on that earlier in our conversation. She had it in her head, and understand, she was appropriately trained. She was trained like the thousands of other people that are in this same career as a civilian employee, as a security staff member. She was given the same training that has worked for decades for thousands of staff members. And as far as she was concerned, it didn't apply. She felt that if she had a closer relationship with the inmate population, that they would do more for her, that she'd get more production out of them, that they would be nicer to her, and that she'd be less apt to become maybe victimized if it turned south someday. Understand, she's working in New York State's largest maximum security prison. She was the wrong person in the wrong place. If you remove Joyce Mitchell from the formula, Clinton Correctional does not have an escape in the spring or the early summer of 2015. Joyce Mitchell is the catalyst.
Got it. So yeah. So take us through the whole thing, Charles. How it went down.
Oh gosh. So again, Joyce Mitchell. So basically, in November of 2013, she's assigned to Tailor Shop Number 1. So now she has a job location where she's consistently the person in charge on a daily basis. As early as July of 2014, almost 11 months prior to the escape, Clinton Correctional's administration gets notification that Joyce Mitchell may be behaving inappropriately, having inappropriate contact with inmates. An investigation is launched in-house, and they can find no credence to it. Basically, in August of 2014, Joyce Mitchell introduces contraband. They're like a reading type glass, glasses that have illuminated bows on them. So you see them advertised on TV that if you want to read a book in the darkness type of thing, it will just illuminate the book in front of you. This is the very first pieces of contraband that Joyce Mitchell introduces to the prison, 2 pairs of these glasses for approximately $10 that she had purchased. She had also brought in some exercise gloves. September of 14, she's making phone calls to inmate Matt's daughter, making outside communication. Huge no-no as well. Inmate Matt has access to make contact with his daughter. But Joyce Mitchell takes it upon herself to do it via her own personal cell phone. From October of 2014 to June of 2015, the time of the escape, Joyce Mitchell had succeeded upon smuggling over 70 containers of black and or cayenne pepper.
What?
Over 70 containers of black or cayenne pepper.
Weird.
Unbelievable. She'd also brought in Bacardi 151, wild turkey bourbon, contraband food, envelopes, paintbrushes, but she's all in. But she had been all in since October of 2014. She was, once the inmates had received in January screwdriver bits and Allen wrenches, the first plot to escape from Clinton Correctional, Joyce Mitchell would receive daily updates as to the progression of the escape and the plan. In February of 2015, Joyce Mitchell would smuggle in 6 hacksaw blades that she purchased from the local Walmart store here in Malone for approximately $6.
She bake a cake and put it in there.
She actually brought them in some frozen hamburger type of a scenario.
Wow.
So she could get them in through past security. And approximately 133 days from the time that she brought in those hacksaw blades, 133 days, inmate Matt and Sweat were able to escape from New York State's largest maximum security prison.
And these were bad guys.
They were. David Sweat was first to arrive at Clinton Correctional. David Sweat was incarcerated. This was his second incarceration in New York State's prison system. He was incarcerated for the 2002 killings of Broome County Deputy Sheriff Kevin Tarsia. Basically, David Sweat and his co-defendants had ambushed the deputy after they had just burglarized a fireworks/gun store out of Great Bend, Pennsylvania, just barely across the New York-Pennsylvania border. They were transferring stolen weapons from that burglary to Sweat's personal vehicle when they were happened upon by the Broome County deputy. They saw the deputy approaching. They hid in the shadows. And as the deputy got out of his car and approached the stolen vehicle and David Sweat's personal vehicle, David Sweat came out of the shadows, shooting over 15 rounds towards the deputy, striking the deputy a number of times in the vest. One round snuck up underneath the vest, going into the deputy's intestinal area, knocking the deputy down, at which time Sweat got in his personal Honda Accord, running the deputy over, dragging him across the parking lot. Deputy Tarsia was still fighting when he emerged out from underneath the vehicle, badly bruised and banged up. And David Sweat and his co-defendants had utilized the deputy's own handgun and basically assassinated him in that parking lot with 2 rounds to the deputy's head. Mm-hmm. The deputy had defensive wounds actually going through his hands as he held his hands up, trying to deflect the round. So that's the kind of cat that David Sweat is. Mm-hmm. Richard Matt arrived at Clinton Correctional 2 years behind Sweat. Again, had spent his entire adolescent and young adult life incarcerated in one shape or form, had done a couple of previous state bids. He was given a second or a third or a fourth chance, whatever you want to call it, by a businessman out of that Buffalo area that had I'm going to call it like a grocery / meat business that this gentleman, this William Rickerson, purchased products that were close to expiration date and would wholesale them out to local businesses at a greatly reduced price. Matt worked for him And shortly after being employed by Mr. Rickerson, Matt started to steal product from him and basically was undercutting prices and had his own sales route. Mr. Rickerson got wind of it, cut bait with Matt, and Matt felt that he was wronged. And Richard Matt and a co-defendant went to William Rickerson's residence in mid-December of 1997, where they abducted the businessman, took him, kidnapped him, beat him violently, 27 hours, brought him across a couple of different state lines, looking for what they thought were large sums of money, returned back to New York State, where Richard Matt had snapped Mr. Rickerson's neck, and they disposed of the body along the Niagara River.
Ooh, man, that's brutal.
Brutal guys, both of them. Brutal cats. Yep.
So how do you
working for Joyce Mitchell in the tailor shop? Joyce thought she had herself a couple of nice boys.
Oh, boy, was she fooled, huh?
Yeah. Joyce bought it lock, stock, and barrel. Yeah.
So how do you get out of a modern prison like this?
Well, again, as crazy as it sounds, the 6 hacksaw blades broken in half, smuggled in by Joyce Mitchell, smuggled back to their cells, Matt's and Sweat's cells. After they're broken in half, handles were fashioned utilizing just cloth material, so they had something to hang on to. And out of the back of their steel cells, Matt and Sweat would continuously scrape that hacksaw blade against the back wall until after a while they finally pierced the steel of the back wall. This attempt to pierce the back wall would be taking place during indoor recreation during the winter months of January, February type of a scenario. Once the holes were pierced, then every night during recreational activities, while the inmates were indoors having their recreation for the few hours, both inmates, Matt and Sweat, would stay up in their third tier cells cutting. While one was cutting, the other one was watching the walkways to make sure that no staff was coming down for rounds. And after 20 or 30 minutes of cutting, they'd switch on and off. One was on watch, the other one was cutting. They would cut approximately 2 inches a night and consider that a good night's work.
Now, how do they know they're going somewhere?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Steve.
Charles, how do they know they're going somewhere? How do they know they're cutting? What are they cutting into?
Sweat and Matt had both had access to the areas behind their cells. We refer to those areas as catwalks. What you find back there is it's a steel grate that you walk on, and the catwalk area contains all the plumbing, all the electrical, all the services and utilities that go into the cells. And as you walk down the catwalk, they're kind of narrow. On the right-hand side is approximately 50 cells per floor. On the left-hand side is another 50 cells, approximately. And then you had 3 stories of that. So if there was a plumbing problem or electrical problem or utility problem of some sort, staff could access those catwalks, work on the plumbing or work on the electrical, and never have contact with the inmate while they were still in their cell. Both
Wow.
Sweat and Matt were familiar with those areas. Sweat had access to those areas. He had been performing illegal electrical activity with the electric feeding into the individual cells. He was kind of making them so that they would handle a little bit more of a electrical draw, benefiting the inmate that was inside that cell for running hot pots or stingers, as they refer to them, as well as their televisions and any other possible appliances that they had in there, type of a thing. So he was familiar with the area. So they knew that would get them out of their cells and into the catwalk area. And then they also knew that basically 3 stories down would be the subterranean tunnels. In your prisons, all your utilities, all your services run underground. None of your services run overhead. So all your heat comes in underground, all your plumbing, all your electrical, all your telephone, everything runs underground. We don't have wires and plumbing going over fences. Everything is under the ground. And they knew that if they followed that subterranean tunnels and followed those heat pipes and water sources and electrical sources, it would lead them to an exit, some way out.
That's crazy. Ken, did you know there was all that stuff going on behind the prison, the cell walls?
Oh, I knew that. I didn't know anything about that.
Man.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. In these prisons, like I said, all your services go underground, especially in your old prisons. And the subterranean tunnels are big enough that where you can walk through them, standing up, and you can, do whatever you got to do. If there's maintenance to be done, in the subterranean tunnels, it's easily done. They were familiar with that. They knew that. So that was their ultimate goal, was to get into those subterranean tunnels and see where they brought them.
Now, they really hid this? It was just them and the seamstress. There was nobody else turning their head or looking away.
Well, there was and there wasn't. There was, in the earlier stages, just the two of them and the seamstress. No one else was party of it. However, at 11 o'clock at night or at 5:30 in the morning, your house, my house, and the big house are all pretty quiet. And if a mouse is making its way down through the back of those walls, or a cat, or a 140-pound man, and I both know that you can only be so quiet. Now, David Sweat thought of himself as being a little bit of a ninja type of a thing, that he felt that he was able to move quite quietly. But you and I both know that I live up here, and like I said, farm country, and it's not unusual in these older houses that you might get a mouse in the ceiling or something. It sounds like a bulldozer at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Matt and Sweat, once they reached the back of their cells, were making nightly runs for the most part every single night during that 133 days, and using the pipes and the different pieces of plumbing as footholds and handholds. There's no way that 100+ pound man, or two of them, can go up and down and climb off all that stuff and not make noise. Mm-hmm. It got to the point where finally the guy that lived next door to Matt, now understand, Matt and Sweat live up on the third tier, the third floor of this housing unit, this block. Matt was cutting one night, and the neighbor hadn't gone to recreation, and his neighbor hears inmate Matt sawing on the back wall, and he goes, "Yo, Hacksaw," that was Matt's nickname. "Yo, Hacksaw, what the hell are you doing?" And Matt's like, "Oh, I'm cutting canvas to paint." And of course, the inmate next door was smart enough to know that, Hacksaw is the guy that returned to the crime scene of where they had dumped Mr. Rickerson's body along the Niagara River, and took a hacksaw and cut Mr. Rickerson up and threw him into the Niagara River, thus his nickname Hacksaw. But Hacksaw probably wasn't the guy that you wanted to play games with. He, you know what I'm saying? He probably wasn't real warm and fuzzy. So
you're going to start accusing him.
You didn't want to be the guy to question him with regards to what was he doing. So it went without further question, but then all of a sudden Matt is befriending this inmate next door to him, and promising him, giving him different things. Prized possession of his color TV would be given to the inmate the evening before the escape. A crazy amount of food and bowls and stuff were given to that same inmate the day before the escape, assuring that inmate was going to sleep well that particular evening and probably not really know of anything that might be possibly going on. So there's no doubt in my mind inmate population knew for quite a while that these guys were on their way out. And then the other contributing factor to that was days prior to the escape, there was a disturbance out in the yard at Clinton Correctional. Now, inmates just can't go up to a staff and go, hey, I think inmate Matt and inmate Sweat are on their way out. I think they're attempting to escape. Because if an inmate does that, their career in corrections and living amongst the other inmates is going to be quite short because someone's going to kill them.
Mm.
So, but there's no honor lost in if there's a mass disturbance out in the yard and chemical agents are deployed and staff has to respond, and then the facility is locked down. And historically, in maximum security prisons, once they're locked down and after a major disturbance like that, they do a facility-wide frisk. It's what we do. The inmates who have been seasoned and that have done any kind of time at all know that that's what we do. So to save face, it's the opinion of myself and in the book, the inmates engineered this disturbance days prior to the escape. And the administration did exactly what the inmates were hoping they were going to do. The administration, Superintendent Steve Reset, contacted the Albany figures, head of corrections, the leaders of Department of Corrections, and said, I'd like to lock down my facility because he hasn't got the ability to do it on his own, and I want to do a facility-wide frisk. His request was denied. Superintendent Reset, his first dep and his dep of security, between the three of them, had over 100 years of experience in corrections. 2 out of the 3 of them were second-generation prison guards. And the bureaucratic system, unfortunately, said, oh my gosh, the tea leaves show that your facility is running fine and you don't have any more problems this year than what you had last year. And it's expensive. It's going to cost us overtime if you shut down your facility.
It always comes down to money.
Comes down to money, and it did. And they told them to cowboy up and run their jail. A few days later, we had a whole different problem.
Yes.
Hello.
A few days later,
Charles, we're
2 inmates.
we're on the edge of our seats here.
We're live.
A few days later, you got 2 missing inmates. 5:30 in the morning, the officer's doing his rounds, doing his standing count. You have to be standing at 5:30 in the morning in these maximum security prisons. The officer's walking down that tier up on the 3rd floor. The cell lights in Sweat's cell as well as Matt's cell are not on. He gets to the first cell. David Sweat is not in his rack. He bangs on the bed. There's a figure in there, but they're not moving. He, out of frustration, pulls the sheets off and reveals a mannequin-type dummy, a homemade figure with sweatpants stuffed with other clothing items, sweatshirt stuffed with other clothing items, and David Sweat is nowhere to be found. The officer moves to the next cell immediately. Richard Matz finds the same thing at approximately 5:30 on June 6, 2015.
Wow. So these guys, when they exit, what are they exiting into? Is it like a swamp? I'm picturing like some kind of
what they did is
culvert.
That 133 days, it was a maze. It took them a lot of tries, and they wiggled, they shimmied, they had to wiggle through walls and tight openings, and they were able to follow the steam line that provided heat throughout the entire facility, and they were able to follow that steam line to where it pierced the perimeter wall. The steam pipe itself, as it pierced the perimeter wall, was encased in a sleeve, and the inmates were able to see between the steam pipe and that sleeve and see the continuation of, again, the the subterranean tunnels. So their initial thought was we're at the base of the perimeter wall. They pretty much knew where they were, and they were going to start chipping away at the perimeter wall. And as they chipped away at it with only hand tools, with chisels and a 8-pound sledgehammer that they had commandeered from a construction job box, they had joked how in Shawshank, Andy Dufresne took, I believe, 20 years to escape chipping away at the concrete. They figured that with the tools that they had available to them, they were going to do it in 10. And that was the joke amongst these two. And as they were chipping away in May, the heat was intense where they were working because they were right next to the steam pipe that was providing heat for the entire facility as it came into the facility. A few days into May, the Clinton Correctional Facility shut its heating system down because they were going into the spring season, no longer necessary to heat the blocks for inmate comfort. And so the temperature changed immensely. Looking at this 20-plus pipe that pierced this wall versus the feet of concrete that they were chipping away at, the option became let's cut through the casing of the pipe. So they cut an entrance hole through the pipe, shimmied down the pipe approximately 12 to 15 feet, and cut an exit hole. Now,
that gives me claustrophobia thinking about it.
They would cut approximately 10 inches.
Wow. That's
and once
freaky.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that just gives me claustrophobia thinking about it. I mean, you don't
tight.
know what the hell's down there. Ugh.
Oh yeah, and understand now. Here's where it gets. You have to look at this, and it's the perfect storm. As they were making their way through the pipes, it was like a scavenger hunt. They found all sorts of different things that they utilized in this escape. Just debris that had been thrown off to the side. They had found a work light that had been left behind at one particular area. They had found a broken broom handle that was down amongst the debris. They found a piece of re-rod that was found amongst the debris, as well as other items. Now, they took the piece of re-rod and they were able to cut it, the end of it, to a tip, to a pointed tip. And they used that as a crude type chisel that they would utilize to chip away at some of the walls that they had to make the openings a little bit bigger so they could sneak through. So they would utilize that piece of re-rod as a chisel type tool. They utilized the extension cord. David Sweat's previous bid, he had spent some time at Washington Correctional Facility. While at Washington Correctional Facility, he was an electrician's helper. David Sweat was able to take that electrical cord and bug it into the electrical that was found down in that area where he was working, and it provided him with not only light, but then he smuggled a fan down from their cells, and they utilized that to move the air to make it a little bit more comfortable while they worked in the confines of that base of the perimeter wall. They utilized the broken stick, the broken handle, as a measuring device to try to figure out approximately how much wall they were trying to chip through, and how much pipe they had to shimmy down when it came time to cut through the pipe so that they didn't cut their exit hole and still be facing perimeter wall. They wanted to get beyond the other side of that perimeter wall. So whatever they found, they were quickly utilizing it to aid them in their escape.
It's like a video game. They're picking up all kinds of extra tools.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And to think, again, they started with simply 6 hacksaw blades and were able to utilize those items. And after approximately 133 days, they were out street level, 1 block from the facility at a manhole. Now, they had gone all the way down to the powerhouse. That's where that once they exited the facility and followed that steam pipe, it brought them down to what's known as the powerhouse, where they generate the heat to heat the facility. The powerhouse is off facility grounds. The exit gate, the steel gate, was wide open, but there's staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at the powerhouse, monitoring the boilers and monitoring the powerhouse. So they elected not to just walk through the gate to freedom. They backtracked one block and decided to exit the freedom through a manhole. The manhole was held in place by a simple chain and lock, and they utilized their hacksaw blades to cut that final obstacle. This was all done actually on June 5th, but it was getting pretty close to the 5 o'clock hour, and they knew that they wouldn't have enough time to get a good head start on their escape. So they returned back to the facility. The escape route now is completely open, ready for them to go. It was a Friday. They spent their last day of incarceration on a Friday at Clinton Correctional, where Richard Matt, as holding true to form, had been giving Joyce Mitchell daily updates, advised Joyce Mitchell that at midnight, Saturday morning, that they would be waiting for her to pick them up at that four-way intersection that they could clearly see from the tailor shop where they worked.
Wow. Ken, you got a question for Charles?
Yeah, I was going to ask how was it Joyce Mitchell, how she was involved up to this point as far as them escaping, and then what her role after that is. Why was she getting updates?
So Joyce Mitchell, again, she was getting updates right from day one, right from January, right straight through. January 15th, she'd brought in, again, the first so-called escape tools, screwdriver bits, security bits, Allen wrenches. And then shortly thereafter, approximately a month later, she brought in the hacksaw blades. But she was getting daily updates as to the progression of the escape. And she became a willing participant. Basically 15 days prior to the escape, Mitchell started to assemble things that were going to be needed for life on the run. She had her Jeep with its GPS. She had put together a compass, tent, sleeping bags, fishing poles. She had guns. She had a hatchet. She had ammunition and more hacksaw blades so that they could cut the ends off the shotgun that she also had in her possession. Joyce Mitchell was all in. Joyce Mitchell had ample opportunity every single day to go to an administrator or to go to someone and say, I think I've made a mistake. And Joyce Mitchell chose not to.
And she was in love with both of them, or they were just kind of leading her on?
Joyce Mitchell was absolutely infatuated with both of them. She had started with Sweat, with her silly games with David Sweat. She was a touchy-feely girl. She always had her arms draped around them. She was always touchy-feely, always wanted to engage this younger lad, Sweat, in some sort of a conversation. Went out of her way to the point where finally Sweat actually ended up getting removed from her tailor shop because it had become so oblivious, or she was oblivious to it, but it had become so apparent to everyone else that finally the administration had moved in and separated the two of them with strict orders that he was to be nowhere near Joyce Mitchell's tailor shop. So who comes in but Sweat's partner, Matt. Now, Matt was a master of manipulation. He had been steering Sweat in the direction that he needed to completely manipulate Joyce Mitchell. He'd been a manipulator his entire life. And he simply took over Sweat's place and actually had sexual contact and sexual relations with Joyce Mitchell. I mean, he just took it to a whole new level, without a doubt. And Matt was the one that was giving Joyce Mitchell the daily updates, and passing love notes back and forth that Sweat would put together to keep Joyce Mitchell sucked in. Joyce Mitchell was sending nude photographs of herself back through Matt to Sweat. I mean, it was just quite a show, needless to say.
Wow. So they definitely, as soon as she picked him up, then they definitely had there's some romantic things happening.
In Joyce Mitchell's head, yes. Oh yeah, Joyce Mitchell figured that these two were going to be the new adventure in her life. Joyce Mitchell felt that she was missing something in life, and that these two were going to fulfill whatever fantasies or whatever that void was that she felt that she was missing. She figured these two cats were the ones that were going to fill that void for her. So she was all in, 100%. Now, of course, once she lawyered up, and once she, spent a little time in the county jail, and once she did, her little time that she did in New York State's maximum security prison, Bedford Hills, of course, her tune has changed. But if you go back and look at the NBC interview with Matt Lauer, she's a defiant, pompous little snot that took no responsibility whatsoever, and plays the sad song of "I'm a victim." And I felt scared for my family, and felt scared for my husband, and the only person who put her husband and her family at risk was her, sadly.
Oh yeah, I'm sure her husband was thrilled with all the details he got about this.
Well, sadly, her husband stuck by her through thick and thin. Pathetically, she's out of prison now. She served approximately a little better than 3/4 of her sentence, and instead of serving the full 7 years and change, she did approximately 5 years and change. And Joyce Mitchell is back living up here in the North Country where we are.
Wow. And
and collecting her retirement.
What?
Don't you love the system?
Well, New York is as bad as California.
To collect retirement.
How does that happen, Charles?
Well, I guess you'd have to ask all the smart people how that happens. But the law has since been changed. But yeah, Joyce Mitchell, with her years of service, now understand she's not getting a huge pension, but she's still getting something. The actions that she helped create cost the taxpayers in this state millions of dollars. The number that was thrown out was approximately $1 million a day while the escape ran. And so the New York taxpayers were on the cuff for approximately $23 million. That doesn't include the millions of dollars spent by the federal authorities involved. And my research said that was in the neighborhood of $60 million. Joyce Mitchell and the damage done to that facility was given during her sentence a bill in the neighborhood of $80,000, as was David Sweat. Richard Matt was killed on day 21 of the 23-day search. Joyce Mitchell was eligible for her retirement. At age 55, she was able to retire and draw what little pension. She only had umpteen years of service with the state, but she had some service working for the school system years prior, and that all added towards her final average for her retirement benefit.
Oh, it's good to hear she was working with children. That's great.
Yeah, she was.
I'm detecting a little sarcasm there.
Yeah. So Charles, these guys were out for 3 weeks, and I know one of them got shot and the other one got captured, but did they wreak any havoc when they were out, or was it pretty much just hiding?
Basically, and this is where the story really has some amazing. The whole story is amazing as far as I'm concerned. The truth is, without a doubt, stranger than fiction here.
Sure.
Matt had a history of escapes. Richard Matt had 4 previous escapes prior to the escape from Clinton Correctional. 2 of the 4 were successful.
Wow.
Clinton Correctional would be the 3rd successful escape out of 5 for Matt. And Matt's last escape, escape from Clinton was basically the same as his very first escape. Back in 1979, he escaped from a youth home over in the Allegheny State Park area. And Matt when he escaped from that youth home, he was moving from campsite to campsite, seasonal homes in that Allegheny State Park area. And there he would pilfer food supplies, beverages, that kind of thing, spend a little bit of time at a particular camp and then move on, leave no real telltale signs that he had been there, just to survive. And his first escape was very indicative of his last. Matt and Sweat had burglarized a number of seasonal camps in the foothills of the Adirondacks and went undetected for basically, 2+ weeks before that they were stumbled upon by an off-duty correctional officer, John Stockwell, who was checking on one of his camps, type of a scenario. So it was amazing. They didn't leave any telltale signs. They burglarized a number of camps. It wasn't until they were kind of bumped by Stockwell, a.k.a. Stumpy, as we call him, John. I worked with John. That they kind of raised a little hell after that because they were moving a little bit quicker and they weren't, the chase was on. And so they weren't being as cautious. Prior to that, while at John Stockwell's camp, Camp Twisted Horn was the name of the camp, they were enjoying pasta that was left in the camp by Stockwell and the other people that were in and out of the camp, homemade jelly, peanut butter. They were living pretty good. They were listening to local news on a radio that was there. They were listening to a station out of Lake Placid, home of the 1932 and 1980 Winter Olympics. They were living pretty comfortable.
What are the chances a prison guard finds them?
Had absolutely no idea where they were. Law enforcement had absolutely no idea where these two guys were. They were chasing hundreds, and now they were up and well into the thousands, or up to well over 1,000 leads, and they had no idea where these two guys had gotten to.
Wow, that's and one of them surrendered, but one of them got killed, right?
Right. Well, so Stockwell bumps him out of Camp Twisted Horn. This is my favorite chapter in the book. John bumps him out. Twisted Horn is approximately 3 miles off the closest road, if you can call it that, the Wolf Pond Road. Wolf Pond Road is a poor example of a 2-lane dirt road. It's more like a 2-lane path for vehicle traffic. John Stockwell, to gain access to his camp, would drive down the Wolf Pond Road, turn off the Wolf Pond Road, heading up towards his camp, and he would travel for a handful of minutes until he got to like a parking area where he would abandon his 4-wheel drive vehicle and then unload a all-terrain vehicle from his pickup truck. And then he would have approximately 1.5 miles, just shy of 2-mile trek up this path with loose boulders and washed out areas to camp. So on a nice little Saturday morning in the spring, John had wiggled on up to Twisted Horn just to check on some game cameras, to check on camp, had his wife's cell phone in his pocket, and had brought a handgun with him. As he approaches camp, he has his dog with him. He has a lab with him. And the dog takes off towards camp and alerts and starts to bark and starts to really raise hell. And the hair in the back of the dog's neck is up, and the dog is challenging camp. He's barking crazy at camp. John's approach to camp was well announced from the powerful ATV engine. John dismounts the ATV, starts to walk towards camp, and he sees a figure walk past a doorway, a glass doorway, the bunkhouse part of camp. John takes a step back, draws his handgun, and challenges whoever's inside. John uses some colorful language and challenges whoever's inside, "You better come out. I've got a gun." And he sees another figure run by that window. Dog is still alerting. Then within seconds, John hears crashing and banging and booming. through the back doors of camp, heading into the brush behind camp, out of his field of view. So John hurries up, jumps on the ATV, and starts racing back to his truck. After a second or two, he's like, nuts! And he yells for his dog, Dolly! Dolly finally catches up, and John continues to make his trek towards his truck, going as fast as Dolly could run. John gets back to his truck, jumps in his truck, and takes off for, again, a little better than a mile plus to just get back to the 2-lane path known as the Wolf Pond Road. The first few seconds, John's clicking as hard as that truck will go, and then he looks in his rearview mirrors and slams on the brakes. He hadn't disconnected the ramps that he had utilized to unload the ATV from his truck. So John's lost a considerable amount of time now. He continues to make his way finally down to the Wolf Pond Road, gets on the Wolf Pond Road, travels a little ways, heading towards civilization, where he's hoping that he might be able to get a cell phone signal. Because the whole premise of this is the fact that he has no cell phone coverage in the foothills of the Adirondacks where his camp was located. And he knew he wouldn't get any kind of a signal until he got closer towards civilization. He comes across a group of other people within a short distance, probably a mile or two from Camp Road. Stops and tells them what had just happened, and all of them break out their cell phones. And as we affectionately refer to it as, they all start to do the cell phone dance, where everybody's got their cell phone up in the air and they're all trying to get a signal. No one was able to find a signal, and John's like, Jesus Christ, I've lost enough time already. I don't have time for this game. John continues down the road a little bit further to where he finally gets a signal. John stops. He makes a phone call. He dials 911, identifies himself, tells them that he's just had a chance encounter with an individual, maybe two, he's not sure, at his remote camp located up off the Wolf Pond Road in the middle of goddamn nowhere in Franklin County. He's getting into describing further events when the cell phone signal drops. 911 attempts to contact John a number of times. They cannot make contact with John Stockwell. 911 contacts John Stockwell's home. His wife answers the phone. This is the 911 operator. We're trying to make contact with John Stockwell. He just called us saying that he's had an encounter with one, possibly two people at his remote camp in the Adirondack foothills, and the call has been dropped and we can't get back to him. Do you know where we could find him? John Stockwell's wife's heart drops, and she's like, oh my God. She holds it together and she walks through how to find John at this remote camp. And as quickly as the call had started with 911, they hang up. They had their information that they needed. Moments later, John Stockwell's wife watches an unbelievable parade of law enforcement vehicles racing past her house, heading towards the Wolf Pond Road. And then she sees helicopters flying overhead, heading in the same direction. That's Camp Twisted Orange chapter. Guess you'll probably have to get the book to find out how it turns out.
Wow, man, that is an unbelievable story. It's so cool. So ultimately, he's found. One of them shot, one of them's recaptured, and hopefully hasn't escaped.
Right. A few days later, another off-duty correctional officer checking camp comes across liquor that had been poured or spilled all over a countertop. You could tell that camp, he'd been checking on a daily basis. He could tell someone had been in camp. Contacted his father going, hey, have you been up to camp? Somebody's been in camp. They've spilled liquor all over the place. You can tell somebody's been in there. Father's like, hell no. Check with one of the other guys, a guy by the name of Paul Marlowe, another camp member. Paul answers the phone, and again, no, I haven't been up to camp, but I'm on my way down with a gun, and I'll come down and help you clear it. Paul Marlowe and this Willette kid, correctional officer, off duty, clear camp. They look it over. Paul Marlowe calls law enforcement and says, hey, we're at a camp up off the main road, Route 30 South, just south of Malone. There's been some disturbance in the camp. And so law enforcement starts heading up that way, but can't find the camp because there's, again, no 911 address for these remote camps. So they asked Paul Marlowe to sit along Route 30 South and flag down the first troop car that he sees go by. So Paul Marlowe is sitting along the side of the road, and while he sits there, and understand he'd only been there for a minute or two, he hears a gunshot. So he contacts, again, law enforcement and says, hey, somebody's shooting. So law enforcement advises him immediately get us the closest 911 address from where you are. So we got patrols in the area, but they still can't find you. So Paul Marlowe travels to the closest 911 address, unknowingly driving past Richard Matt, who had just shot at passing vehicles. As soon as Paul Marlowe was notifying law enforcement of the 911 address, 2 unmarked cars appeared immediately. Paul Marlowe gets out, identifies himself, tells them where he's hearing the shots. And while law enforcement is interviewing Paul Marlowe, 2 more shots ring out. And they're trying to pinpoint the direction, made difficult by the echo of the mountains. So once again, after the second shot had rang out, a caravan of 3 vehicles, 2 pickup trucks towing campers, 1 pickup truck towing a boat, were pulling over behind law enforcement. The drivers got out, checked tires, and then got back in their vehicles and started heading back onto Route 30, heading in the southern direction. Law enforcement stopped the campers and just quickly talked with them, and they thought maybe they had blown a tire. Unbeknownst to law enforcement as well as the owner of the camper had literally been shot just moments earlier. Law enforcement identified the sounds of the gunshots, identified the areas from where they were coming from, and immediately set up perimeter, the best that they could under the circumstances. Hours later, BORTEC, which is the Border Patrol elite teams, had made contact with Richard Matt. Richard Matt was ordered by BORTEC supervisor Chris Voss to show his hands. Richard Matt refused to comply, but instead brought a shotgun, pointing it towards the BORTEC commander. Chris Voss engaged Richard Matt with his M4 and taking the suspect into custody. Matt was killed as a result of the encounter.
Bam.
Wow.
BORTEC, after Matt was secured, immediately researched the area with the assistance of FBI tactical teams, BORTEC tactical teams, as well as state troopers and other law enforcement agencies, and came to the determination that that David Sweat was nowhere to be found. And Sweat wouldn't be seen or heard from for a few more days.
Charles, when you have a prisoner like that escape, you can basically shoot him, right? I mean, he's an escaped felon. You don't...
Absolutely. Under the way the laws are written, an escaped prisoner can be shot. Absolutely.
The threshold is much lower. You don't have to give him,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a whole different game changer. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt.
Charles, that is one hell of a story, man. Thank you so much for coming on and telling it.
Your capture of Sweat, and again, unbelievable. David Sweat and Richard Matt. Now, when Richard and Matt was captured, they had traveled well over 30 plus miles in a western direction from Clinton Correctional, from Dannemora. Richard and Matt, these guys had bushwhacked. They'd traveled cross country. Very little bit of this traffic that they had done was along roadsides. A lot of their travel was done bushwhacking. At the time of Richard Matt's capture and subsequent shooting and death, Matt was about 10 miles from Joyce Mitchell's front porch.
His long lost love.
But that was there's no doubt in my mind Matt was on a mission, and Matt had an agenda, and Matt was on his way to Dickinson, New York to see Joyce Mitchell. David Sweat had been arguing with Matt towards the end of their run. Enough with this western direction. Let's head north. Let's go to Canada. Let's get out of here. Because Canada's so close. Canada from Clinton Correctional was 25 miles from the prison. And from where Matt was shot and killed, less than basically 18 miles. Sweat had been advocating and arguing with Matt. Let's go to Canada. Matt and Sweat had separated just a couple of days prior to Matt's capture and death. Sweat was on his way to Canada. 2 days after Matt's death, a New York State trooper from Troop B, Sergeant Jay Cook, was on patrol by himself. Jay Cook was patrolling roads in the area of what's known as Trout River in Constable, New York. Jay Cook was basically in his own neighborhood. As Jay Cook had come down the Coveytown Road, he observed an individual in camouflage with a backpack hiking across a meadow, alfalfa meadow, less than 2 miles from the Canadian border, heading north towards Canada. Jay Cook's initial thought was, oh, looks like one of our guys. And as he got just a little bit closer with the troop car, he stopped and yelled to the individual, "Hey!" The individual turned around, said, "It's all good, bro." Turned right back around and continued to head north. Sergeant Cook immediately identified him as David Sweat. Sergeant Cook immediately ordered David Sweat, "Hey, come here." And David Sweat continued to head towards Canada. Sergeant Cook immediately exited the troop car and gave foot chase, running through a pretty deep ditch, getting up into the meadow. By then, Sweat had a pretty good lead. The sergeant, with all of his duty belt and gear, was kind of slowed down, but he was kind of gaining on Sweat until Sweat dumped the backpack that he was carrying. And then Sweat started to open up some distance, heading towards a tree line. The sergeant knew that if he got to the tree line, he was going to be within range of Canada quite quickly, and his ability to take him into custody would be no longer there. Cook ordered him a number of times to stop, that he was going to shoot. Sweat continued to open up ground, heading north towards Canada. Sergeant Cook took a shooting stance and with his Glock service revolver shot the first round, striking Sweat in the shoulder. Did not knock him to the ground, but you could see Sweat stumble. Sergeant Cook ordered Sweat to stop again, that he was going to shoot. Sweat continued to run towards the tree line. Sergeant Cook fired the second round, again striking Sweat, knocking him to the ground. The sergeant called in, making known his location. As his different assorted backup units started to arrive, Sergeant Cook was standing in between Sweat and Canada, and at gunpoint was David Sweat. First aid was immediately rendered to Sweat. Sweat was immediately taken into custody. When they did the measurements, they figured that Sergeant Cook had run approximately 100 yards in pursuit, stopped, took a shooting stance, and shot again in the neighborhood of 100 yards, striking a moving target twice.
Wow. Good shot.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Usually you make the guys do a couple jumping jacks and nobody can hit their target, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's my understanding that state police now kind of give them when they're qualifying, they're giving the guys an opportunity to run 100 yards and shoot at 100 yards just to kind of see just what that was all about. Jay Cook is a hell of a guy. I've had the opportunity to talk to Jay Cook a number of times. Sergeant Cook was a frequent flyer in and out of our court. Couldn't ask for a nicer man. And it's nice to see a hometown guy bring this madness to an end.
Hell yeah. I mean, you can't get more dramatic than that, Charles. I mean, he's standing. You can't get more dramatic than that. He shoots a guy on the run, then he stands between him and Canada while he's taking.
They were less than a mile and change, in the area of a mile and change from Canadian border.
I can see why Hollywood's all over the story. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Really
Ben
cool.
Ben Stiller came up. They did a 8-part series on it. Unfortunately, they didn't do it justice. There's been a handful of books written about it. We seem to be getting most of the attention. We had no agenda on our book. We just wanted to tell the story. Like I said, the spirit of the book was real simple when we wrote it. I was tired of all the misinformation about the false news reports, about the different agendas of the different people that were reporting. And we had just one agenda only, and that was just to tell the truth and tell the story. This story is it's mind-boggling. It's amazing. And the twists and turns in it, there's more twists and turns in this thing. We haven't even touched the surface.
I'm sure.
Of the twists and turns of this book. It's crazy. It's got a Hollywood twist involving Harry Warner with Warner Brothers Television. There was a chance encounter with Matt and the granddaughter of Harry Warner, Warner Brothers Television. His granddaughter Desiree Telstar. They've got involvement in this. I mean, this book and this story has got so many twists and turns. It's unbelievable. It's just crazy.
Well, if there's a choice out there of books to read, certainly I would recommend yours. You have the inside track. You're going to have you can tell you just have the accurate information. It's truly amazing. I wish Ben Stiller and those guys had reached out to you.
Yeah. Well, it would have been a whole different series had he, I'll tell you that.
Well, Charles, thank you so much for coming on and sharing that. Where can people get your book? Where can they buy it?
Dannemora, 2 Escaped Killers, 3 Weeks of Terror, and the Largest Manhunt Ever in New York State is available basically anywhere books are sold. Amazon is without a doubt the big one, but you can go to Walmart. You can go anywhere books are sold and get it. We've gone from the hardcover. We're now at the paperback version. There's a digital book out there. So yeah, there's 3 different formats available right now.
Awesome. Ken, do you have any more questions for Mr. Gardner?
No, I'm good. Good story.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Well, thank you again, sir, for coming on. And I will put links to your book in the show notes, and I also put them on our website so everybody can go pick up a copy and check it out. And with that, I'll do our outros. Thank you, Charles.
Steve, Ken, thank you for taking the time, and thank you for the interest in our book.
Thank you.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you'd like to support the show, go over to thingspolicec.com. When you get on the website, there's a few different ways you can show some support. You can donate directly. You can do a one-time donation or a monthly donation. Even $1 helps us keep the lights on over here, pays our expenses for the month, is greatly appreciated. You can also just use our Amazon affiliate link. If you just want to buy something on Amazon like you normally do, just do it through our link, and we'll get a little kickback for that. So you can go to the website and do that, or in the show notes, I'll put a link. You can just click right through that link. And the third way is you can buy some merch. So we have coffee mugs, we have T-shirts, men's and women's, and we also have hoodie sweatshirts now. So go over to thingspolicec.com and check it out. You can also just listen to the podcast there, or you can apply to be a guest. Just scroll down and click on Be a Guest, and what you want to do is just give us a brief synopsis of your service, how many years you were on the job, and just a very brief idea of the stories you'd like to share, and I will get right back to you. So thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.